Mr. Chair. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. At our July meeting, I presented an overview of the FY 2024-2025 RTA budget. The adopted budget provides $100 million of resources, including $52 million to roadways and another $32 million to transit, supported by anticipated excise tax revenues of nearly $127 million during this fiscal year. For FY 24, we collected $123.5 million in excise tax, $4.5 million above the Eller forecast. For the current fiscal year, which began on July 1st, 2024, the RTA collected $20.4 million in excise tax through August, trending just slightly below the Eller forecast. Expenditures for FY 25 are limited to 3 roadway projects: Ballot 1 Tangerine Road, Ballot 25 Valencia Kolb to Houghton, and Ballot 15 Grant Road at the Union Pacific Railroad crossing, totaling $81,400 of reimbursements through the first 4 months of this fiscal year. Although TPT revenues have continued to grow at a steady pace in recent years, collections to date are far below the original estimate. The 2006 forecast anticipated revenues of over $2.1 billion at the conclusion of fiscal year 2026. Excise tax revenues now are anticipated to reach $1.75 billion over the 20-year period. That's $350 million less than originally anticipated, which we have known since at least 2013 when the forecast was first adjusted. And the board has been using other state and federal funds to supplement a portion of that revenue that was never realized. Mr. Chair, that concludes my update. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions? Mr. Quigley?
Yeah, so I was wondering what happened in 2021 when it seems your estimates got much better than your actuals. What did you change? What you were using for your estimate basis in 2021?
We use Crystal, could we see the second slide, 06 to 26? Okay, thank you. So I'm not sure what you're referring to, sir.
It looks like in 2021, the white, which I believe is the actuals, and then the green is the forecast, got close for the first time in all the years prior. I'm wondering whether you changed, if anything changed in your projections as to what you use for forecasting.
Well, you know, these were performed by the Eller College. I didn't know the specifics of the calculations. Mr. Mugimi might be able to shed some light on that.
Sure, be happy to. So as you notice, we started updating the revenue forecast, and we plan to go back every year, and that's part of that adjustment schedule. The Eller folks obviously did look at the economy and look back and then look forward to make. I forgot. So as part of the updating of the forecast, our partners over at the Eller, they did make adjustments frequently, as you can see on the chart. And with every adjustment, they did look back at actuals and made modifications to their projections into the future. So you're correct. The projections started getting more and more aligned with actuals based on most recent projections.
So you always used Eller, you never used another forecasting firm or anything like that. The Eller just got better.
Well, the data was better. The history was better to use the actual history. And the answer is we did have Jim Rounds recently do a peer review of the most recent estimate. So, and then he came back and he agreed with all their assumptions as well.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Valadez?
Mr. Chairman, problem, Mr. Mohimi. I assume these bars are aggregate totals?
So yes, I guess I'm not sure which bars you're referring to,
The
but
gray ones, the 2006 forecast.
so the gray ones were the original estimate. That's the 2006 forecast.
But it's an aggregate, correct? Because I see in 2026, it's about 2.1.
Correct.
So it's an aggregate total. Are the other ones aggregate as well?
Yes.
So why is 2025 actuals so low as opposed to non-existent in 2025?
2025 is to date.
Oh, okay.
It's not full 2025.
So the gap, even in spite of what the board had done in terms of using local and regional funds, is still substantial. Correct?
Correct. We're still looking at as James mentioned, we're looking at, by the end of the program, 1.75 compared to the 2.1.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And could you go over for me again, the timeline for when revenue is realized? Like, if I go make a purchase in January, when does it show up in the RTA budget? Or the RTA revenue funds?
So, Mr. Chair, there's about a 2-month lag from what is reported from collections, what's reported from the Department of Revenue. So when you're seeing the report in July, let's say the activity was actually in May. If that answers your question.
But would like 2024 revenues be revenue that was collected January through December, or is it like March through February or November through October of this?
So we refer to everything through the fiscal year, so it would be July 1st through June 30th of the following year.
Actually collected, not when, has nothing to do with when you receive it, correct?
Well, it depends on who calculates it and how they organize it, but we do try to take into account that lag when we show those amounts. And the thing is, there's very little difference from month to month. So even let's say that someone else had calculated using just the months we received the information from ADOR as opposed to when it was actually collected, the difference would be quite small.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any additional questions? All right, seeing none, moving on to the project update. Mr. Ellis. Would have to refer to.
In the packet, the first page, Pima County Regional Transportation Authority, and then it has project ballot, and then the 2025 budget.
So we had summarized the budget during the July meeting. I think that this information's in the packet just as information. Yeah, so I did mention it, but there isn't a presentation specifically on the budget. It's just for information. Of course.
On the administration from 2024, it goes from 1.7 million to 5 million in 2025. Why the increase?
The increase was primarily due to budgeting for an RTA next election.
So 3 million of that is cost for RTA next.
Not completely, but the majority, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Rick, project update?
Crystal, I'm all ready if you want to bring up the project slide update. I think we got it on the wall ones, and there we go. So at the last meeting, you had requested an update on where we stand with the projects, which is kind of a standing item. We formatted this to also include some of the financial information that had been asked. So over the summertime, we collected this and working with the jurisdictions. So this is the latest and greatest that's also been shared with the board as well. So this covers the roadway element in detail, but we'll hit upon the other elements as well in just kind of a summary format towards the end. And as a means of orientation on this, I found that as I go through, it's easier to do the whole presentation to hit upon the conclusion slides towards the end and summarize some of the information. So if there's a question you want to have on a specific project, by all means, make note of it. We can come back on it at that time. So orientation on what the information is. So this is going to show each roadway element project that is remaining to be done. I'll give you the current status and then some of these bullet items highlight where we're at, how much has been done already for some of these portions that have been broken into segments, the activities that are remaining, and then the programmed funding that it's going to take to drive us home, and then any additional cost increases that the team now has identified the jurisdictions have shared with us. Okay, so I'll hit upon that at the tail end as well. So the first one out of the gate is Tangerine Road. So this is what the town of Marana refers to as Phase 2A, which essentially goes from I-10 over to what's at a point referenced as Marana Tech Drive. So the initial phase from Dove Mountain over to La Cañada has already been completed. The design on this particular phase is already finished and they are under construction. They started that earlier this summer and are making good progress with the initial activities, including utility relocations, drainage, earthwork, things like that. The railroad component will be coming at a little later date and time in the overall delivery on this aspect of it. And the interchange work you may hear Marana talk about is being done in conjunction so that it's coordinated, but is completely separate from the RTA element. So you'll hear about that. Marana has been very good about sharing that information to make sure that it has the seamless coordination and integration on that, but it is outside of the RTA project. Right now, we've got about $44 million programmed through the TIP activities last fall that we completed last year, and that was adopted by the mayor or the regional council earlier this spring, and then formally just a few weeks ago through the Federal Highway Administration. And then we need anticipated approximately $1 million, with a portion of that being allocated for the railroad aspect. Phase 2B essentially takes it then from Marana Tech Drive, continues to the east and matches into the completed portion up at La Cañada. Design has at the 30%, but they've already identified and started kickoff efforts associated to take that to the 60% milestone anticipated for next spring. So you have the design, some of the right-of-way acquisition activities are going to be remaining, environmental permitting, utility relocation, and then ultimately construction. On this one, we have about 28 million that's been programmed. But we need another 13.5 on top of that to finish out that section. The next project up is Silver Bell, Phase 2 from Garay to Camino del Cerro. The southern section from Grant to Garay had been completed by the city several years ago. The design activities on this one are done. The right-of-way acquisition activities are done. The utility relocation's been done. The initial phase of the cultural outreach efforts have been completed. And right now the city's working through the last of the environmental permitting efforts. And then essentially when that's been completed to the to the satisfaction of the Corps of Engineers and associated entities, then that project can be advertised. This point in time, we've got $47 million programmed on that, but based on the estimates and the updated information they shared, we're anticipating it'll need another 5.5. Sunset Road from I-10 to River. This one's being done in conjunction with the main line, what we call the GAP project, which essentially goes from Ina to Ruthroff, and is completing and connecting the interchanges that were built at Ina when we reconfigured that, and then Ruthroff Road. So this completes the 4-lane widening in there. The initial phase of Sunset Road had actually been completed all the way back in 2016, where it went from Silver Bell over to I-10. Construction on the Sunset portion right now. So the focus has been on mainline I-10. They've been doing some activities out there. You've seen the overcrossing and the initial shell on that. You can look off to the east and see some of the new bridge and the fill material going in for that. So they're overall about a quarter of the way through, with construction anticipated to be finishing up, I believe, tail end of next year is I think when their target is. So we'll be bringing it all forward, wrapping up I-10 and completing this portion of it as well. We programmed approximately 24 million on that, and that's been identified, and that's still good to carry this forward project to completion. First Ave, Grant to River is the next one up. Project design and activities have been initiated on this one. Partial construction funding is allocated in the 25-29 TIP. They are fully underway with the initial design efforts, which consist of data gathering, public outreach. Right now we have a task force formed and we're in the middle of those outreach efforts with them. We're collecting just the initial things that you always do at the beginning of a project, but we're making real good progress on this. There's still obviously the detailed design effort, right-of-way acquisition, permitting, utility clearances, and then construction on this. Approximately 67 million's been identified for the whole amount and programmed in the 25-29 tip, but that leaves approximately 68 million still remaining. They anticipate being at the completion level of a design concept report, which is roughly 15 to 30% completion. And at that time, they'll have a better cost estimate as well as identify any potential phasing or early advanced delivery opportunities that may arise. Next one up is the grant, UPRR. So this is the undercrossing going underneath the railroad tracks there at Grant Road. Design is at the 60% milestone on this. One of the key things we've communicated and been working with the project team on and with the jurisdiction, they have identified that a separate, in order to keep the project within budget and to avoid a lot of complications with the railroad, they're moving the bike and pedestrian facilities to a separate bridge structure that would cross over the railroad, cross over I-10, and then tie into the loop effort over the Santa Cruz River. Essentially, that's way offline. It's significantly far away from the corridor, so that needs to be handled with local funding, and we've communicated that with the city as well. This is a period for compliance. You're going to see this theme come up on several projects, meaning construction has to start by June 30, 2026. So all the other projects have had periods associated with the delivery on that. These are the ones that we're highlighting that still have to meet that compliance as per the ballot, as per the audit reports, and essentially compliant with the legislation. The IGA began in 2016, designs at about 60% with right-of-way permitting, utility, and construction remaining. We've programmed approximately 25 million on that and identified that the initial estimate has approximately 8.5 million that has to be covered by the local jurisdiction for the out-of-scope items on that. It's essentially that bike and pedestrian bridge structure and the improvements that connect that. It's located roughly about a half mile south, I think is the initial siting location. So all that is off the corridor, and this is considered peripheral facilities.
On the corridor, what are the bike facilities?
So the sidewalk will remain in effect. That'll be there. And then essentially that could be then bicyclists could have the option of staying in the street where they have the legal authority to be there, or they can dismount, walk, or the city may make some sort of temporary concession or interim concession. Haven't been fleshed out as to all the details though. The configuration retains the sidewalk facility though.
But there's no bike facility now.
Correct.
And it doesn't sound like it will be in the scope.
Right now it's identified as a separate facility that's located about a half mile south of Grant Road. So that would be a separate one. Correct. So bikes can still use the roadway in a legal manner. That's state law. They share the road, but there's no separate facilities for that.
This is brought up months ago here, probably crossing on that railroad, that there was part of the design was to include that pedestrian bicycle pathway over that railroad, because there was no way to accommodate them with the limit wanting to push the way.
Sorry.
I was just double checking.
To accommodate them in the width that's there.
Yep,
So now it's the city of Tucson's responsibility to pay for that?
that's correct. So that always been, that's the enabling legislation says that any items, activities outside of the scope of the purview of the project must be covered by the local jurisdiction.
But why isn't a bicycle facility part of the scope?
It normally would be if it's in the alignment of the main corridor, but by virtue of this one having such a high degree of separation and being outside of the corridor as a separated facility, then that stretches outside the interpretation from the legislation.
Says who?
Says the legislation that enabled that. Facilities that are outside or above and beyond the scope purview of the improvement project itself. The project boundaries essentially go from I-10 to, I think it's Fairview Avenue. They don't expand laterally up and down the railroad or the I-10 facility.
So if they move the bike and ped facility up closer to Grant Road, would that be part of the scope?
It'd have to be in the Grant Road alignment, then it would be, if they could somehow figure out a way. And the original, some of the earlier variations that we were working with the railroad on included tunneling underneath the abutments when the railroad was more open to that. Since then, they dismissed that, rejected that opportunity and that alternative, then necessitated another option. by virtue, that shifted it outside because of the limited space we have available.
And that costs 8.5 million.
That's based on the 60% estimate level we had from the summer, correct?
Okay, thanks.
Downtown Links, the next project up. So the east half on this, like I've been reporting, has been open, operating to traffic. And the remaining portions on this, they built phases, I'm sorry, 1 and 2 from I-10 to Church and some peripheral drainage work. That's all been taken care of and in place. Construction's at about the 60% milestone with the bridge structures in place, the railroad shifts having taken place, and then they're going to be coming through and doing the connection underneath the new bridge structure. It's in progress. We programmed approximately $20 million. Don't anticipate anything more. And right now they're on track to try and wrap this up next summer is the targeted timeframe. Grant Road phases 3 and 4. So the earlier phases had completed phase 1 and 2, essentially from Oracle up to Park, or the western end is how we refer to it. They shifted down to the east end and are doing the last 2 miles there. The design is complete, construction has started and is fully underway, and they've got a combination of activities associated with the storm drainage, water line relocation, and the storm sewer work. So they're working their way in a manner from west to east. They have gotten into the Alvernon intersection, which is why if you drive through that area, you'll note significant traffic restrictions, and they'll continue working that way down to the other end, and then they'll come back and start handling some of the surface activities. There's programmed about $63 million, none anticipated need in addition to this. We are still undergoing and underway with some of the right-of-way activities, but primarily in the form of condemnation proceedings, final legal settlements, activities like that. Nothing that's hindering up the project, and it's moving forward as is. Current timeline remains in effect of completing activities out there by the end of next year. I'm sorry, the end of 26. Grant Road 5 and 6. So this is the middle 2 miles. The design is at about the 90% level on that. And they've put in a hold on that because there's funding, and I'll hit upon this in a second. They've reached a good milestone on that, and that's essentially where the project team is identified as a good hold point. Right now, none of the right-of-way acquisition or the construction funded is included in the 25-29 tip on that. So that goes back to they're at a good milestone. They're continuing the coordination activities and discussions with the utility providers so that once funding becomes available at whatever point in time, then that coordination will be a lot further along rather than restarting it. So those are ongoing discussions and activities. But all the remaining design, right-of-way, utility relocation, and construction activities are needed. And at this time, there's nothing funding any of that. And that's estimated to be at approximately $112 million. Fully loaded, everything in. 22nd Street, this is Keno to Tucson, or what we call Phase 2, which is the bridge over the Union Pacific Railroad. Design activities are being finalized, as well as obtaining all the necessary environmental clearances, approvals, funding. We're looking to bring the IGA forward to the board for the remaining amounts at the December meeting, and then subsequently mayor and council. Construction is targeted early next springish, I believe is their target timeframe that we're operating off of. The Keno interchange has already been built, complete and operational. This will connect this to the east down to the Tucson Boulevard area. So it shows a number of activities going on, but they're all happening in parallel. So you'll hear a lot of effort associated with that. The city has also gone out, closed the loop with the affected neighborhoods, made sure they circle back with them. So essentially now it's the logistics associated with moving big projects forward. There's been approximately 170 million programmed. Yes, that's a real number. That's not a typo. And at this point in time, that is the amount that will deliver the project as needed. So we're working, as I said, to put that in the form of the IGA and turn that to the elected officials and entities in the month of December. The Baraza Aviation is an allocation to ADOT for advanced right-of-way acquisition and design funds on this. So this is also a period 4 compliance project. The funds are available at ADOT in fiscal year 26. No activities have been done to date, and we'll make sure that this ties in and coordinates up with ADOT's efforts when they're ready to initiate. So at this point in time, that amount is identified, allocated, programmed, and in place, and ADOT's been made aware of that, and they'll initiate it when they're ready. Irvington Road, this is from the Santa Cruz River to east of I-19. The funding for this particular project was meant to address bike ped facilities as well as some geometric issues. With ADOT having an interchange project and reconstructing that in there, we did similar to what we've done on Ruth, Roth, and Ina, and contributed that funds to their effort so that that now is a seamless effort and is being kind of completely within the purview of ADOT. At this point in time, they have completed, this is a little dated because they just crossed the 60% milestone. Design, right-of-way, permitting, utility activities are all underway in parallel, and they're anticipating having this thing ready to obligate or authorize for advertisement next spring, and then put this out on the street with construction activities anticipated for next summer, fall. This has an approximate contribution of $9.8 million, and that's been made and no additional amounts been identified on this. Valencia Road, and as you notice, both of these, I'm keeping that note in there about period 4 compliance. So right now, as you hear, ADOT should meet that time frame by being ready next summer. That'll easily comply with the June 30, 2026 timeframe. This is another project that falls in that. The project is fully funded within the 25-29 tip. We've completed the IGA efforts with both the RTA board as well as the city of Tucson, and they're going to work to get design activities up and running as we speak on this. The programmed amount is $9.8 million, and at this point in time, they've indicated and confirmed that they will design that to meet that budget. Don't anticipate having any additional monies that they would contribute for any peripheral or outside scope items or improvements at this time. Valencia, what we affectionately refer to as Valencia East. So this is the last of the big capital portions down on the far east side from Kolb to Houghton. The latest and greatest on this is the project has actually gone through all of its advertisements, award, and the notice to proceed for construction activities was yesterday. So it's officially in construction now. We had done the IGA efforts and activities on this for the earlier design phases, as well as completion of the Kolb intersection. And this one's fully ready to go, and they anticipate having this one completed probably about summer of 26 is the target timeframe on this one. We programmed $42 million in the 25-29 tip, and at that point in time, no additional increases are envisioned. 22nd Street, same thing using the vernacular. This is 22nd Street East from Camino Seco to Houghton, the last 2 miles that ties in, similar to what Broadway and Speedway did. Design activities have been initiated with this. Data collection efforts are underway. This is another period 4 project. And the team has actually identified advanced acquisition for right-of-way. So we're bringing that forward to the board so that we can get an early jump on that, and they can get activities running in parallel to ensure that that compliance timeframe is met. So design, right-of-way, environmental permitting, and utilities are all still remaining, but they're on track with that and anticipate being ready to advertise that in spring of 26 with construction targeted to start in the summer. We've got $36 million programmed on it with an additional $2 million based on initial estimates. And we'll watch that as we hit the milestone submittal targeted for spring of next year. Harrison Road is a new bridge. This is another IGA that was approved by the board and the mayor and council recently. Project is fully funded in the 25-29 tip, but it's another period 4 compliance project. This is a brand new standalone project. So unlike some of the other ones I've referenced, there have been pieces or segments built. This is all by itself. So we've got the $15 million programmed, anticipate no additional funding at this time. And the city's procurement offices are going to be leading efforts to bring on the project team members on this through a combination of alternate delivery that we've been working with the city to make sure that they hit that June 30 timeframe of 2026. Houghton Road, which is the last one, or what we refer to as segment 7. So project design activities on this, 1 through 6, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. 1 through 6 have already been built and completed. And this one, the design activities have been completed. Right-of-way activities have been ongoing and are targeted to finish up by the end of the year, maybe spill into early next year, but that's all setting the stage for then the big advanced utility relocation, which is substantial. 18 months is significant out there. We've got gas facilities out there. Lumen has facilities that are significant as well as TEP. So they're going in various stages. The project team's been working closely with them to see where they can break them out, advance portions of them so that they can effectively streamline this or even expedite that. Right now, we're carrying an 18-month time frame on that. That'll probably start in early 25, which will allow the project to evaluate going to construction and advertising sometime around summer 26. We have been working with the city and the county to identify the amounts contributed or responsible for with a scope expansion because the original legislation called for 4 lanes down towards the south, going out to 6 lanes, then necking back to 4. As you all have seen, the project has constructed 6 lanes from everything south. So we want to make sure we have that dialogue on what's required. That's the expansion that's also part of the legislation and what amount is due back to the RTA on that. The project has identified $66 million in programmed with an additional $8 million that's been identified so far to be needed. And we'll be updating that as the next activities progress. Moving into the categoricals associated with safety, environmental and economic vitality, as well as the transit. So elderly and pedestrian safety, and this essentially carries across all of these. The safety devices that were associated with some improvements down South Tucson, those activities were completed earlier this fall, and they're up and running, and South Tucson is now benefiting from those improvements. We have design activities underway for the greenways, pathways, bikeways, and sidewalk for a variety of bike boulevard projects, multi-use paths. Some are in construction, some have been recently completed, some are in design. All those are going to be delivered over the course of the upcoming fiscal year. And then lastly, with the transportation-related wildlife linkages, the Highway 86 improvements are working with the TO Nation to solicit comments, feedback, and input from the various affected communities out there, and then identify what we'll be going forward with as the preferred alternative on that particular effort. So key takeaways in all this. I apologize, I did kind of go through that fast in the interest of time to save time for questions on that. But the big walkaways so that you'll hear this and it kind of summarizes everything is we have 17 roadway projects in the roadway element remaining to be completed. All those categorical ones I went through are all fully funded, fully programmed, and the TIPS covered all its necessary amounts as per the IGAs. We have 5 currently in or pending construction, with Valencia East being noted in there as the most recent one started, with 12 of those 17 in various stages of what I call pre-construction. We have some that haven't started. We've got others that are in various states of progress or ready for advertisement, as you heard with like Silver Bell. So that's how we're breaking it out. Tried to group these according to the jurisdictions that are overseeing those, with Tangerine, with Marana, all the middle portions there with the city of Tucson, and then Barraza and Irvington residing with ADOT as the lead jurisdiction on that. This is a graphic we've pulled together. You may have heard folks comment on this, reference it. It's a graphic we created to help explain how the funding allocation's gone to mirror what the board has identified as the priorities as we've presented this over the last several months and even going back maybe a year or so. So the priority, the emphasis on this, making sure that the money is allocated in the right areas on this, is it's in the construction phase. So jurisdictional requests, supplemental funding, you've heard some of the ones that have already had some funding added through last year's TIP cycle. Keep the balls moving and keep the balls in motion that have been in motion. So we've retained that, we've met that, and the board is committed to doing that. Construction phase projects that are under construction like Links, Sunset, 22nd Bridge, Grant Road 3-4, Silver Bell, those have all been ones that have been acted on to make sure that those deliveries are being made and the improvements are put out there for the traveling public. Right below that are the compliance projects. You heard me talk about period 4 jobs, and as you see, there are 7 in there that are identified with Grant, Irvington, Valencia East, Valencia Central, Harrison Bridge, and 22nd Street East, Barraza Aviation. I just can't read that far. And then the other Valencia. All those are going to be coming up in some sort of form or fashion on that, but we're keeping those identified to make sure that those stay at the forefront or any kind of adjustments that are needed on that. The last ones are the ones where we've already met ballot compliance. We've already complied with the legislative requirements, so they're able to move forward then as additional funds become available by the local jurisdiction, or if the board gets any funds returned through the sale of property transactions, surplus funds returned, or contributions that are due to the RTA, the board has the discretion to program them as desired. So this was created to kind of help visually articulate all that and help it make sense so that folks could understand, why are you allocating funds in a certain way? This shows that, matches that, and has been used as a tool. We've tried to develop and share that. With that, I can answer any questions, expand on anything, or go back as you see fit. And Mr. Vice Chair, the floor is all yours.
Questions?
I was gonna say, I hope I covered what you guys had all asked for, which was the financial component to go along with the status element as well. So thank you for your patience and indulgence while I went through all that.
No questions?
You're not gonna get away.
I thought so, yeah.
Sorry, so I added up all the numbers for funds needed and I come up with $209 million. If you add the 4 deferred projects that are in RTA next of 238 million, that comes to $447 million shortfall. With only, you're telling us you're only $350 million shortfall in revenues. Where's the, how are we gonna, first of all, how are you gonna cover it? That's almost $500 million, which is 25% of the original budget. What's the plan? And what is this committee's responsibility when there is such a huge shortfall in the program?
I'm going to answer your questions I'm going to try and tie them all together with an answer that covers several of the elements you bring up. So first and foremost, one thing I want to reemphasize, by board action on the 4 deferred projects, that puts them now in the purview of RTA Next. So they're no longer under the purview of RTA Current. They're next projects for consideration, and they're eligible for feedback, documents, discussions, that type of thing through that forum, and the public outreach effort has been initiated. So those are no longer under this committee's purview, no longer a concern that has to be worried about. The projects that are remaining, I'd have to go side by side with your math. When we totaled it up before, it was approximately 195 million. So your ballpark, it's right around the $200 million mark. We're going to be updating the board. It's ongoing discussion. So how are we going to complete this? What are we going to be doing with this? We're going to be working with the board at the upcoming meeting to share the latest and greatest information, to be able to present updated financial stuff on behalf of James. And once the board makes decisions, discussion has that kind of context, then we'll be able to provide and share that and what they want to do, how they want to handle the current plan going forward. So that's a state of evolution. I don't have an answer for you at this point in time. The board is working on that, and they've asked for information to be presented at the December meeting that will allow them to make recommendations or provide direction to us for going forward.
So let's go back to the 4 deferred projects.
Okay.
If what I understand, if RTA Next fails, those projects just go away? Do they just evaporate and it's nobody's responsibility to pursue them and fund them?
I wouldn't go that far. I think they remain then at the board's purview, and the board will make decisions based on the direction of how to move forward with those at that time. Unfortunately, it's just too much to speculate as to what would happen in the event of a failed election, or if it's not ready for ballot at some upcoming time frame. So the board retains that ability to make that decision for those projects when that situation arises.
Okay, so then let's go back to our responsibility of $200 million shortfall. If the board's pursuing it, shouldn't we be making a recommendation to the board representing the voters and what the voters, we perceive the voters to want to complete the program? Isn't that our responsibility as an oversight committee to do something about the shortfall?
I think that's a fair statement. However, the information that we'll be presenting to them, the information we've given you and the status of this was in advance of the September meeting. Since then, they've asked for additional pieces of information and more analysis. We'll be bringing that forward. And out of respect for the board, we want to present that to them first for their comments, questions, discussion, and then whatever direction decision they make going forward. So we don't have it available yet. That'll be where we unveil it. Then we can decide how we'd go forward with that, share it, implement it, what their direction is going to be.
But once again, we're coming in after the decision is made. We're an oversight committee. We should be providing recommendations prior to a decision being made by the board. What's the point of telling us after the fact? We've done nothing.
Because that's when we'll be able to unveil the updated information, and we would have more accurate assessment and summary of everything that's going on.
Well, shouldn't they wait for the oversight committee to make a recommendation before they draw any conclusions?
They have not asked that. They've wanted the information brought to them directly.
Then what are we doing here is what I'm trying to get at. What are we doing here?
Well,
We have informational meeting after informational meeting. This committee does nothing. There's a shortfall of 25%, and we've done nothing in 20 years to affect the decisions made by the RTA board.
any member can reach out and talk to their respective board member. I mean, you can pass that information on, but as a committee, the direction we've received is the board wants to see this information. They want to digest it. They want to see it. They have not asked to run through any of the delegated committees, either TMC or yourselves, prior to bringing it in. So that's how we've been treating that, is giving them the first unveiling at that. If they take action and want to request additional feedback or input and designate that, then they can do that at that time.
But they have designated us as the oversight committee. It's in the rules.
Mhm.
It's in the laws. We shouldn't have to wait for the board to come ask us for our opinion. We should be doing that prior to them forming an opinion.
I can only tell you how they wanted to handle this particular situation, and my guess is due to the sensitivity and the complexities involved in it. That would be my speculation.
I give up. Thank you.
Mr. Quigley?
Rick, first, I want to thank you for your presentation. I also want to thank Julie for getting the information out to us ahead of time. It was very helpful.
Mhm.
And I think we're having good discussions about that. Rick, my one comment that I want to make is maybe the numbers on your individual, you might put the financial numbers on each of your projects. They're all there for us to see in the information that Julie sent us. But it would be great to have them right as you go through the page, so many $1 million, what's left, et cetera.
I'm gonna bring one up, or I'm gonna go to a slide and have you point out specifically.
Rick, I was speaking about the ones, yeah, okay. So at the bottom of this, somehow put in the amount of money that's been spent to date, what was programmed by the RTA, and, what's left. Again, you can see it on another slide, but you've got very, very small numbers, and you look for it in that. That's all. My other question, though, is the Harrison Bridge. The Harrison Bridge was not on the original RTA program. Is that correct?
No, it was one of the line item. It's number 31 that was part of the roadway element projects.
By itself?
By itself as a standalone name project, correct?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Validus? What? Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Rick, I saw that several of the projects had a substantial additional increase in cost. Where is that money coming from?
That's back to Roop's point. That's what the board is going to be wrestling with, is where that's going to be coming from, how that complies with the legislative requirements about any overruns being the responsibility of local jurisdictions, balancing that against amounts PAG's identified to contribute or the RTA board has identified to contribute. I'd say that's still in a state of flux, and that has not been finalized or determined at this point in time. Local jurisdictions can bring any amount to contribute, and that's happened on like 22nd Street Bridge, where the city of Tucson went out and got a grant awarded and allocated to contribute and kick in for it. So at any time, they can identify those sources, but that's part of the ongoing dialogue and discussion as well.
Now, when the original RTA plan was put together in preparation for the May 2006 election, obviously the projections of the cost were done with the understanding that they were going to be off by, especially as we progressed through the 20-year program. What I noticed on some of the projects that you were highlighting here was that the discrepancy in the additional costs, and two of them, I don't remember which ones they were one of them was about a 33% increase in the additional cost. Another one was over 100% increase. I don't get it. Is that normal, or why? I saw those numbers and I said, what's going on here?
Let's see, how do I want to answer that? No, it's not normal. It's a complication that's been associated, we've been wrestling with the jurisdictions as well. There's not a silver bullet answer. I can't point to one thing and say, that's the one that's got it. It could be a combination of underestimated property values. It could be a combination of a more volatile market that we're in now for the delivery of a lot of these aspects, unknown or change conditions by an entity that has the ability to do that, like the railroad. We've gotten answers from railroad that they eventually can call the shots. that have added millions and
President, what? I'm
millions of
sorry.
dollars. They can essentially call the shots. They are a higher power entity than we are.
I remember dealing on the Palo Verde
I was
project.
gonna say that I'm
15
preaching to the
years.
choir on that one. So a combination of a lot of things that have come in that are outside of the team's control and outside of our control. What we've tried to do, and the jurisdictions have been extremely good working with us on this, is getting in front of it to identify, okay, where's that volatility and what can we try to better estimate, allocate for it, anticipate. We've been really good about explaining it after the fact, but how do we get a better feel for what we can anticipate on that? We work closely with the industry representatives as well as jurisdictions to try and ease back that shock value that comes.
Mr. Chairman, Rick, and I guess part of my concern is this. I mean, obviously, once we passed, this community passed the RTA in 2006, we put some administrative guidelines in place. And a big part of that was that the RTA original plan was intended to pay for items in the plan. When I see additional costs ranging 33% and the one that was well over 100%, that's really, really concerning for me that those additional costs, I mean, I get it with the railroad, but those numbers are way above and beyond what I would anticipate on a railroad. I guess what I'm asking for is if we can have a breakdown on these projects of why, especially when they go above 33% in additional costs, I'd like to see why. And I don't expect you to do it right now, by the way.
Well, I'm gonna give you a couple easy ones I can pick to,
14's the biggest impact there.
14. I'm going to guess. So yeah, 14 on this. Actually, that's one of the harder ones because the railroad was an example. It doesn't materialize on all project aspects of it. I think in some cases, at least from my experience in the profession, there are assumptions that may have been more optimistic. There may have been data information and data points that provided a scenario XYZ that may have been based on preliminary things. So as we've gotten in there, we firmed it up and found out, wow, where we thought we were going to affect 5 properties, we're actually affecting 15. And based on different interpretations or better interpretations of laws, rules, regulations, we have to buy all 15. So that's an example of where the right-of-way cost can be significantly higher. I wish I
this
could give you other
project-
than estimating that was done then in a world where we viewed versus what we're able to see now and connecting those. Many, many, many differences.
Well, we expected I mean, if you recall, I was involved in that.
Yes,
So we expected a delta, but this one's over 100%.
yeah. This one, Grant Road, have gone up significantly. A lot of that's just due to the, I think, overall complexity of the construction involved as well as the right-of-way acquisition that was involved. I know looking back on some of the particular projects, especially in a denser urban area, okay, the assumption is, you know what, if I miss the building, I won't have to worry about too much damages. But better detail analysis on the laws that govern all that type of stuff is that didn't get you out of that. I still have to purchase now a full building, relocate the business. That's one. That could be a $2 million impact on 50 that, wait a sec, that assumption that that could be navigated turns out, nope, that's not going to be effective on that.
You know, it would be useful to kind of know a breakdown, particularly those that are bigger like this one or some of the other ones that I was anticipating or that I saw. And maybe retrospectively to see some of the other projects and where we saw some of this creep in cost. Because this is really substantial. I have a hard time with this one.
Yep. And I think the ones that we're seeing on are the ones that have greater degree of complexity, urban environment. So you'll notice several of these didn't need additional funds. So the allocations, the estimates that had all been developed working with the jurisdictions, they matched. So we're solid on those. So it's not that all projects are off, but the ones that seem to be the more complex, particularly 22nd Street Bridge, Grant Road in a deep urban environment, First Ave in a deep urban environment, that's adding complications that we can try to pull that together to give a better summary of that or show where the differences between, you know, I thought it was gonna be $2 million in right away and it's 50 million. Okay. series of bad assumptions that compounded on each other, we can look to try and see if we can summarize that.
Yeah, and maybe a retrospective look of any project that may be exceeded by additional costs, maybe above 25%. So we get a better feel of where that's been and whether or not that's normal, along with maybe a timeline, because obviously we've got an inflationary factor on an annual basis as well.
You got it. Okay.
All right, that's some input.
So, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think both of you just touched on what I was gonna add. So unfortunately, over the last 2 years, we've seen significant inflation increases in construction cost. So that's part of it. So if we do a diagram, for sure, you're gonna see any excess cost increases were mostly introduced, I would say, from 2019 on. Anything beyond that was a little bit more aligned with the estimates, including potentially some unique situations. But unfortunately, again, and you can check this information with state and federal officials, they're all struggling with the same issue. Construction costs over the last 2-3 years have increased by more than 40% in many cases.
And I think that's not an understated thing because it's not one thing in the construction costs. We asked ATB to come make a presentation to the board about a year ago, a year and a half ago. And cybersecurity insurance. 10 years ago, what's that? Now, big chunk of change. Different conditions coming out of the federal government that are putting requirements on things that take something from XYZ millions of dollars to ABC. So there's significant changes across multiple aspects. So trying to pinpoint it, lock it all down, get in front of it has been the challenge we've been working with the jurisdictions on and working closely with industry representatives as well. We can kind of look back and say, that part, we looked at X, we thought X, we really planned on X, and guess what? It was Y. It's a little easier to see the cause and effect, but we'll try to break that out, summarize that for a future effort.
Thank you, Rick. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Rick, I have a clarification question regarding the Grant Road phases.
Yes.
Especially in the neighborhood of the Alvernon Grant Road area, there's a lot of misinformation being out there that the project has stopped because there's no more funding. And I'm like, so I wanted to be able to, when people ask that question, be able to clarify, no, that's not correct. And especially with all that's going on in there, there's a lot of disabled people in that area. There's a lot of people that rely on the buses and they're all getting very upset and confused. So I'm trying to, when I hear these things out there, I'd like to be able to justify, yes, no, that's incorrect. And what website should they go to really better understand so they're not hearing it through word of mouth incorrectly.
Fantastic question. And I'm glad you bring that up because that's one thing we definitely want to make sure is that the resident citizens, what they're hearing is accurate, complete and correct. So the Alvernon intersection is included within the boundaries and the limits of Grant Road phases 3 and 4, which is actively under construction, but that's fully funded. All activities, everything's going forward as planned with construction anticipated to be complete by the end of 26. So Grant Road 3-4, the eastern 2 miles, is not affected by any of the funding issues. When I went back to that slide that showed the hierarchy, that was one that the board had acted on and approved the additional funds because that was a critical delivery to the residents out there. The one that's been affected by it is the central 2 miles, what we refer to as 5 and 6, which I think essentially goes from Sparkman to Swan or something like that, I think. Or don't quote me on that. I got my in limits mixed up, unless I mentioned it in here. To Palo Verde. Mountain to Palo Verde. Sorry, I can't, for some reason my clicker's not working. The middle piece is on hold, working with the city. They've identified that they can't really progress with any of the major activities because the right-of-way and construction remains unfunded at this time until additional funding is brought forth or something is secured or decisions are made. However, that's where they've also told me we're continuing coordination efforts. So it's much more low volume, it's much more behind the scenes, but with all the utility activities, with anybody that's got property transactions that may be happening offline or out of that kind of context. They're making sure they stay on top of that. So they haven't shut down and walked away. We just don't have actual production activities going with it. But they have maintained all interest, effort, coordination, endeavors to support that. Does that answer your question?
Sort of. When I direct people to the website, even myself, when I go to the website to clarify what projects are being done when, it can be a very confusing and hard to navigate.
So, trying to predict what's going to happen out of this is going to be gray and nebulous. And I believe the websites have been updated to unfortunately reflect that there's a lot to be determined. And as you're hearing that discussion going forward to complete, the board's got that challenge in front of them. But the city's Grant Road website should be active, should be up and running, and should have very detailed information on the 3-4 phases. So the part that's actively underway and making progress on production, that should be very, very realistic and very accurate as well.
Thank you. Ms. Ryman?
I just want to comment on the First Avenue project that you were asking about. That had a scope change and a down scope change. It went from the ballot, it was a 6-lane road. It's now going to be a 4-lane road. So there is no right of way expenses because it's going to stay the same measurements as it currently is. It's a modernization project, excuse me. And it's doubled in cost from what's in the ballot. And it's not exactly what was in the ballot. If the city did what was in the ballot, it would probably be 3 times what you're seeing if they went through a 6-lane road. But this project was delayed by 2 years as well. And probably over that period where the inflation was high, it could have started earlier and maybe saved some money.
I want to clarify a couple of things because at this point in time, we do anticipate right-of-way activities. So you're correct in that it's a modernization under the lane configuration that's out there. The board did approve that scope adjustment. However, the exact configuration needs to be addressed, and that will include some widening because of this multiple safety issues, operational and performance issues. So the city's looking very hard at that. You're exactly correct. It's not what the 6-lane was originally envisioned, so it'd be significantly less than that, but it is still got right-of-way components to it. To Ramon's question, this has an example where originally, as envisioned, the existing bridge over the Rito River was deemed suitable 20 years ago to be widened. That was an assumption that was made based on just very limited analysis. Now, more detailed analysis has determined that in order to get the proper service life and design life out of that, it needs to be fully replaced. Widened, replaced, and a brand new one constructed. So that's an example of one that, hey, what we thought 20 years ago when we did the initial look turned out not to materialize 20 years later.
Quigley.
I just want to mention, I think there's also an issue of capacity for construction. The companies here are really in an area where they can't find people. There is not a lot of, the labor force here is an issue for them. And quite frankly, the amount of projects we have going on, whether it's the city's projects or the RTA projects within the jurisdictions, they can't find enough competitive bidding to bring forth. The ADOT project that's going to be on I-10 in Palo Verde, Sunt's going to do it. Sunt was the only bidder. Okay.
There was one other one.
And-
There's 3 total.
Yeah, but Sunt, it was theirs. There was, so I think that's the other thing we have to recognize. That's a hard thing to tell the public about, though, and explain that. But it's being experienced in Phoenix as well. There's just not enough construction capacity in our region.
You bring up a good point on that. Those are some of the factors that, as we're talking about, are affecting our delivery and working with the jurisdictions. Now, they've taken some means and measures to try and, I don't want to call mitigate for it, but looking at something simply as, can we stagger delivery dates? Can we stagger bid openings and advertisements? Sometimes that has an effect for an outfit. They'll look at it and go, if I have 5 all stacked up, I've got to pick and choose. If we can naturally let them kind of separate, we can more strategically evaluate that and make those determinations on it. while you're correct, the one thing that we have held and we have continued to benefit from, the quality of the contractor still remains at a top level. So we've not had our product compromised or sacrificed or had any of this, and we ran into this before, where you've got an outfit or a firm that's coming in, does questionable work, and then winds up going out of business halfway through. So we've not encountered that. That's to our plus. You are right in that we're not overflowing with them, so we have to be very strategic in how we do it and careful of how those dynamics come into play.
Just from the construction industry as a whole, there's capacity out there. Yes, there is a decent amount of work at this point, but there is still capacity. It leads to different issues that you're dealing with within the industry of what clients do you want to work for as well within the industry. And if you got clients that are good to work with, you're going to go work with them versus clients that make things difficult to accomplish. So just a piece of.
Now, the fact that you're all seeing these things, they're all coming to roost in the big roadway project. So everything that you're bringing up, those complications, nuances, they account to a complexity and they account to money and how to try to identify that, allocate that, make sure we've done that. Or if we can minimize it and avoid it altogether, how can we work with that? And the jurisdictions have been on top of that. We've been trying to work closely with them, offering thoughts, input, or suggestions that we see on a regional basis that can maybe come in and benefit.
Great discussion. Any other questions? All right. Seeing none. Is there a motion to adjourn? You'd like to help us out with that one?
I'll make a.
We're done. All right. Thank you all. Thank you. Appreciate it.